The notary pressed the last page toward me across a conference table that probably cost more than my first truck. Congratulations, Mr. Calloway. Meridian Services Group is officially yours to sell. I signed my name the same way I always have, slow, deliberate, like a man who learned to write in a trailer park school in rural Kentucky. $12,400,000. I stared at the number until the zeros stopped meaning anything. 31 years ago, I'd been eating cold soup from a can in a Motel 6 off I-75, wondering how I was going to pay for the gas to get to my next job interview. My phone buzzed on the table before I even stood up. Unknown number. Atlanta area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something, call it a father's instinct, call it 30 years of hard-earned patience, made me answer. Daddy? Her voice was smaller than I remembered. Thinner, somehow, like something had been wrung out of it. Daddy. It's Claire. I walked to the window. 14 floors down, Nashville's afternoon traffic moved like water finding its level. I'd built my company in this city, street by street, contract by contract, starting with a mop and a second-hand floor buffer. I know who it is, I said. 11 years of silence. And now this. I need to talk to you. Something's happened. A pause. Something bad. I thought about what I'd said to my lawyer 6 months ago, when the acquisition offers started coming in. When people smell money, the past has a way of showing up in your driveway. He'd laughed. I hadn't been joking. Where are you? I'm still in Atlanta. But I can come to you. I know you're in Nashville. I saw the article in the Business Journal about your company. Of course she had. Give me a few days, I said. I'll call you. Daddy, please. I don't have a lot of time. The bank is. A few days, Claire. I hung up, pocketed my phone, and shook the notary's hand. Then I drove myself back to my house in East Nashville, not the mansion people expected when they heard what I'd sold the company for, but the same 2-bedroom Craftsman I'd bought 11 years ago with the first real money I'd made. I'd never moved, partly because I liked the neighborhood, partly because I'd learned a long time ago not to let a good day turn you into someone you won't recognize on a bad one. I sat on the back porch and let myself remember. Claire had been 27 when everything fell apart. I was 53, working as a logistics coordinator for a regional freight company that had been bleeding money for 3 years without telling anyone below senior management. They announced the closure on a Tuesday. By Friday, 1,800 people were out of work. I was one of them. My wife, Darlene, had passed 4 years before that ovarian cancer. Caught late. We'd spent everything we'd saved on treatment that bought us 14 more months together. I don't regret a single dollar of it. But it left me with nothing but a mortgage I couldn't carry alone, and a daughter who'd just gotten engaged to a man named Preston Whitfield III, whose family ran one of the largest commercial real estate firms in Georgia. I remember the engagement dinner at the Whitfield estate in Buckhead. I wore the suit I'd bought for Darlene's funeral because it was the nicest thing I owned. Preston's mother looked at me the way you look at a stain on a white tablecloth, not with anger, just with the quiet intention of dealing with it later. His father asked what I did, and when I told him I'd just been laid off from a freight company, he nodded once and turned to talk to someone else. Claire didn't defend me. She laughed nervously and changed the subject. A month later, when the bank started foreclosure proceedings on the house, I called her. She was sympathetic on the phone. She said she wished she could help, but that Preston's family was already doing so much for them, and it wouldn't look right to ask. She said maybe I should look into one of those government retraining programs. She said she loved me, but she said it the way people say, "I'll pray for you," like a door closing gently. I moved into a rented room in a house in Antioch with 3 other men who were all in various stages of starting over. I was the oldest by 15 years. I took every cleaning and maintenance job I could find. Office buildings, restaurants, gyms. I'd get up at 4 in the morning to strip and wax floors before a building opened, then spend the afternoon bidding on the next job. The last time Claire and I spoke before today was at a gas station of all places. She and Preston were passing through Nashville on their way to Memphis for something, and she'd texted to ask if I wanted to meet for 20 minutes. I pulled up in my work truck, lettering half done on the side, the back full of cleaning equipment and supply boxes. She looked at the truck the way her future mother-in-law had looked at my suit. "Daddy." I care about you, she said, standing in the parking lot in her linen dress and sunglasses. But Preston's family has certain expectations. We have clients, investors, people we need to impress, and when they ask about my family, she stopped, started again. I just think it might be better if we gave each other some space. Until you're more settled. Until I was more settled. I was 53 years old, her father, and she needed me to be more settled before she could acknowledge me. How much space? I asked. She hugged me quickly, got back in the passenger seat of the Mercedes SUV, and that was that. I drove back to Antioch and sat in my truck outside the rented house for a long time. Then I went inside, made a list of every commercial cleaning contract I'd need to land to make payroll for one employee besides myself, and got to work. I called Claire back 3 days after the notary's office. We arranged to meet at a restaurant in Midtown Nashville, neutral ground. When she walked in, I saw it immediately the way a father always does, no matter how many years pass. She'd aged, but not the way people age when life has been kind. There were lines around her mouth that weren't there before. Her eyes moved around the room too quickly, checking exits, assessing people. That's the look of someone who's been blindsided and hasn't recovered yet. She'd lost weight she didn't have to lose. She sat down across from me, and for a moment neither of us said anything. She looked like she wanted to cry and was refusing herself the permission. "You look good, Daddy," she finally said. "You don't," I said. "Tell me what happened." And she did. Preston had been having an affair for 2 years with a woman who worked in the Atlanta office of a competing firm. Claire found out through a mutual friend, the kind of information delivered with just enough pity to make it feel like a knife. When she confronted him, he didn't deny it. He said the marriage had run its course. He said his family had concerns about the direction of things. Divorce papers arrived at her door 8 days later. His family's attorneys were thorough. The prenuptial agreement she'd signed at 28, excited and in love, had been drafted by people who planned for exactly this outcome. She walked away with limited assets and mounting credit card debt she'd accumulated, trying to maintain a lifestyle that had always been funded by someone else. The Whitfields had stopped taking her calls. She moved into a friend's spare room. The credit cards maxed out. A loan she'd co-signed for Preston's side business became her legal problem. The number she owed creditors was $340,000. "I saw the business journal piece," she said, looking at the table. "I know what you sold the company for." I waited. "I'm not proud of why I'm calling, Daddy. I know that. I know how it looks." "Tell me how it looks," I said. She looked up. "Like I abandoned you when you had nothing and came back when you have everything. That's exactly how it looks." She flinched but held my gaze. "I'll give her credit for that. I was wrong," she said. "I know that. I knew it long before today, but I was scared, and I was young, and I let people talk me into a version of what my life was supposed to look like, and I didn't have the courage to." Her voice broke. She steadied it. "I didn't have the courage to choose differently." I thought about that gas station parking lot, her linen dress, the way she'd hugged me quickly, like I might contaminate her. "Do you know where I was the Christmas after you and I stopped talking?" I asked. She shook her head. "I was volunteering at a food distribution center in Bordeaux because I couldn't afford to do anything else and I needed to be somewhere that felt like purpose." I paused. "I thought about calling you. I picked up the phone probably 40 times that week, but I thought about what you'd said, about being settled, about expectations, and I put the phone down every time." A tear ran down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "I built Meridian, from a one-man cleaning operation to a company with 212 employees," I continued. "We serviced hospitals, schools, government buildings. I paid my people above minimum wage from year 3 onward because I remembered what it felt like to wonder if you'd make rent. I did all of that without a single phone call from you. Not on my birthday. Not when I signed my first $1 million contract. Not once." "I know," she whispered. "What are you here to ask me for?" She straightened. "I need help, Daddy. I need enough to pay off the debt and start over. Maybe 300,000. I have some ideas about." "Stop." I set my coffee cup down. "You don't have ideas. You have desperation dressed up as ideas. There's a difference. She closed her mouth. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and placed a sealed envelope on the table between us. She looked at it like it might be something that could hurt her. I had a feeling someone would find me after the sale went through, I said. I hoped it would be you. I wasn't sure. You knew I was coming? I knew someone was coming. I hoped it would be my daughter, and not just someone who used to be. She stared at the envelope. Open it, I said. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a check. She looked at the check first the way people always do, and her face went through several things quickly. Confusion. Something like relief. Then, slowly, understanding that this wasn't the number she'd come for. $75,000, she said. That's correct. Daddy, I owe $340,000. I know exactly what you owe. My attorney has been aware of your financial situation for the past 4 months. I watched her absorb that. Nothing I'm telling you today is a surprise to me. She set the check down and picked up the sheet of paper. I watched her read it. These are conditions, she said. They are. She looked up. You want me to move to Nashville. I want you within an hour's drive of me. Yes. Not because I'm trying to control you, because what I'm asking you to do next requires accountability, and accountability requires proximity. She went back to the paper. I watched her read each line. First, the $75,000 was to be used exclusively for housing deposit, basic living expenses, and a portion of the most urgent debt. Not to pay off everything, not to fix everything at once. She would negotiate payment plans on the rest herself, learning what that process actually felt like. Second, she would get a job, not in commercial real estate, or in any field adjacent to the Whitfield world. Something with her hands. Something that required showing up on time for someone else's schedule. Restaurant work, retail, a warehouse. Something that reminded her what an hourly wage felt like. Third, she would attend therapy. Real therapy. Not the kind of wellness coaching that Atlanta's wealthy class used to feel better without changing anything. A licensed therapist, consistent sessions, for no less than 1 year. Fourth, she would volunteer. Specifically, she would contact the food distribution center in Bordeaux, where I'd spent that Christmas 11 years ago, and she would give 20 hours a month. She would do this not to feel good about herself, but to feel uncomfortable enough to grow. Fifth, once a month, she would write me a letter by hand. No email, no text, paper and pen, in her own words, reflecting on what she was learning. Not reporting, reflecting. I might respond. I hadn't decided. And finally, when she had paid back $75,000 from her own earned income, not from another relationship, not from borrowed money, not from selling assets she'd accumulated during the marriage, we would sit down and talk about what came next. This could take years, she said. Building something real usually does. I'll be almost 40 by the time. I was 53 when I started over, Claire. 40 sounds like a gift to me. She set the paper down and looked at her hands for a long moment. I let her sit with it. I'd learned patience the hard way. The way you learn everything that matters by having no other choice. You said you hoped it would be me, she said finally. What does that mean? It means that for 11 years, I told myself I'd made peace with losing you. That I'd accepted it the way you accept weather something that happens to you that you can't control. I laced my fingers together on the table, but I hadn't. I just buried it deep enough that I could function. There's a difference between healing and hiding, and I'd been hiding. She was crying properly now, not the controlled single tear from before. I missed you, she said. I missed you the whole time, even when I was telling myself I'd made the right choice, even at my wedding, even when everything with Preston was perfect on the surface. There was always this hollow place where you were supposed to be. I know, I said. I missed you too. That's why I'm sitting here and not just having my attorney send you a polite refusal. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, the unself-conscious way she'd done as a little girl after she fell off her bike and was trying to pretend it didn't hurt. I thought about those years, teaching her to ride that bike in the parking lot of an elementary school on a Saturday morning because our neighborhood street had too much traffic. How she'd been so furious at the bike itself, like it was the bike's fault she kept falling. How she'd finally gotten it and looked back at me over her shoulder with pure shock, like she hadn't actually believed she could do it until she did. I wanted to tell her that was the person I'd always seen in her, not the woman who'd let a buckhead address and a man's last name convince her to shrink herself. But I'd learned something in my 60s that I hadn't understood in my 50s. Some things you don't say. You let them be discovered. Take the envelope, I said. Take some time to think about the conditions. If you agree, call me by the end of the week. If you don't agree, I understand. But I won't negotiate the terms. They're not punishments. Every single one of them is something I did myself, in some form, during the years you were gone. She picked up the envelope, held it in both hands. What if I fail? She asked. What if I can't do all of it? Then you call me and tell me the truth about why, and we figure out what comes next. The only condition that has no exceptions is the honesty. You lie to me once about anything and I walk. I'm too old to be lied to by people I love. She nodded slowly. Something in her face had shifted. The desperation was still there, but underneath it, something that looked like the first hint of solid ground. She left an hour later with the envelope. I sat alone with my coffee and looked out at Nashville's afternoon moving past the restaurant window. The first letter arrived 9 days later, which meant she'd made her decision within 48 hours and found a place to live fast. The handwriting was cramped at first, like someone remembering how to use a pen, then loosened up by the third paragraph. She'd found a studio apartment in East Nashville, 3 miles from my house. She'd applied for a position as a server at a diner on Gallatin Pike. A real diner. The kind with laminated menus and regulars who sit in the same booth every morning. She'd started therapy with a woman who had, in her words, exactly zero tolerance for excuses, which she said she needed. She didn't ask for anything in the letter. She just described what the first week had felt like. She used the word humiliating twice and clarifying once. That told me something. I kept the letter in the drawer of my desk without responding. The second letter came on time. She'd started at the food distribution center in Bordeaux. She wrote that she'd expected it to feel charitable, like she was doing something for other people. Instead, it had felt like looking in a mirror. She described a man who came in every week, somewhere in his late 50s, who always asked the volunteers how their day was going before he took anything, who had a kind of dignity that embarrassed her, she said, because she'd spent years confusing dignity with wealth, and was only now starting to understand they had almost nothing to do with each other. That letter I read 4 times. By the 3rd month, she wrote about the diner in a way that surprised me. She'd initially taken the job because it was available and it paid, but she'd started to notice things. She was good at reading people. She knew which regular needed a joke with his coffee and which one needed to be left alone. She knew when someone was having a bad day before they sat down. She wrote that this had always been true of her, this ability to read a room, but she'd been using it for years to manage social situations at fundraisers and charity galas, to figure out who was important and position herself accordingly. Now she was using it to make sure an elderly woman's eggs came out right and a construction worker felt seen when he stopped in on his lunch break. It feels more real than anything I did in Atlanta, she wrote. I think I've been performing my whole adult life and I didn't know it because everyone around me was performing too. I called my lawyer that week and told him to keep monitoring the situation, but that I was cautiously optimistic. Month 4. She wrote about Preston for the first time. She'd gotten paperwork from his attorneys regarding a piece of the debt dispute, and she'd had to handle it herself, without the buffer of money or family connections or anyone to call. She was terrified, she said. She almost called me. Instead, she called her therapist, who helped her think through what she actually needed, then helped her find a legal aid resource for exactly her situation. She handled it herself. I sat in that legal aid office with people who had it so much harder than me, she wrote, and I felt 2 things at the same time. Grateful that I had resources they didn't, and ashamed that I'd wasted 11 years pretending resources were the only thing that mattered about a person. I wrote back that time. 2 sentences. You're thinking clearly. Keep going. She told me later that she had folded that note and carried it in her wallet for months. The fifth-month letter was the one that cracked something loose in me, though I didn't let myself acknowledge it until later. She wrote about a memory. She was 12 years old, and I'd taken her to a job with me on a Saturday. I was doing weekend maintenance work for extra money, cleaning the floor of a small manufacturing facility. She'd been bored and a little embarrassed to be there. One of the workers, a man named Gerald who was running a weekend shift, had stopped to talk to us. He and I had talked for 20 minutes about football and about his daughter who was applying to colleges. When we left, Claire had asked me how I knew him. I'd told her I cleaned his building every Saturday and had for 2 years. "I didn't understand why you knew his daughter's name," she wrote. "I thought you were just the cleaning guy and he was just a factory worker and those were fixed categories of people. But you knew his whole life. And he knew yours. I've been thinking about that for weeks, and I finally understand what I was seeing. You treated every person you worked with like they were worth knowing. I spent the last decade surrounded by people who only knew you if you were useful. I had become one of those people, Daddy. I don't want to be that anymore." I read that paragraph on my back porch on a Wednesday evening in April, with the first fireflies of the season starting up in the garden. I didn't respond that time. I just kept going, like she was keeping going. Month 8. She'd paid back $14,000. She'd picked up a second shift twice a week. She'd started handling the food distribution center's inventory system because she had a head for logistics. Turned out that growing up, listening to her father talk about freight routes and supply chains had left a mark she hadn't noticed. The director had offered to pay her a small stipend for the extra coordination work. She wrote, "I told him I'd think about it. I wanted to ask you first if that counted as earned income toward the repayment. I think it does, but I wanted to be transparent. That was the moment I knew we were going to be all right." I texted her just this once, outside of the letter system. It counts. Good instinct to ask. Month 10. She told me she'd met someone, a man named David who taught high school history in Inglewood and volunteered at the same distribution center. She described him in exactly one paragraph, which showed more self-awareness than anything else she'd written. She wasn't performing the relationship for me. She was just telling me it existed. "He knows about everything," she wrote. "About Atlanta, about Preston, about what I did to you." He read one of my therapy reflection sheets that I'd left out not on purpose, but I didn't ask him to put it down either. He said, "The most important thing about a person isn't who they've been. It's what they do when they understand who they've been. I think you would like him." I thought I probably would. Month 14. The letter arrived thicker than the rest. She'd been promoted at the diner, not to management. She was careful to clarify, but to a training role for new servers, which came with a small raise and the responsibility of helping someone else learn the job. She wrote 2 full pages about what teaching felt like, how it turned out she had a patience for it she'd never expected to find in herself, how watching a nervous 19-year-old learn to carry 4 plates at once had given her a satisfaction that was completely disproportionate to the objective importance of the task. "I think I understand now," she wrote, "why you worked 16-hour days building something that other people thought was small. It wasn't small to you because you weren't building a cleaning company. You were building proof that you were still standing. That's what I'm doing too, and it feels, Daddy. It genuinely feels like the most important thing I've ever done." Month 16. She'd paid back $41,000. Month 18. The final letter. She enclosed a cashier's check for the remaining $34,000 plus $812 in what she called accumulated interest, that I calculated myself because it felt right. The letter was 7 pages. She wrote about everything: the diner, the distribution center, David, her therapist, a woman she'd befriended at Bordeaux named Rosetta, who was 67 and came in every other week, and always brought homemade cornbread for the volunteers. She wrote about the city she'd come to love, this East Nashville neighborhood that was nothing like Buckhead, and everything she hadn't known she needed. She wrote about the version of herself she was leaving behind, and the version she was still building, which she said didn't have a finished shape yet but had a foundation, and that was the part she was holding on to. And then, near the end, I've been trying to figure out how to say this, so I'm just going to say it plainly. What you did for me in that restaurant wasn't giving me money. Other people have given me money. Preston's family gave me money, and it made me smaller every year. What you gave me was a structure, a set of hard things that had to be done in a certain order. Not because you wanted to watch me struggle, but because you knew I couldn't skip the struggle and arrive anywhere real. You gave me the map you'd used yourself, and you trusted me enough to think I could follow it. After 11 years of me proving I wasn't trustworthy, you trusted me anyway. I don't have the words for what that is, Daddy. I don't think there's a word for it that's big enough. I read that page 3 times sitting at my kitchen table. Outside the window, the garden was coming in well. Tomatoes this year, some herbs, the same stubborn peony that came back every spring no matter what the winter did to it. I picked up my phone and dialed. She answered on the second ring. "Are you sitting down?" I asked. "I'm always sitting down when I see your number come up," she said. "My heart can't handle standing." I laughed. First real laugh in a while. There's a farmer's market on 5 Points every Saturday morning. I've been going for 3 years, and I've always gone alone. A pause. "Daddy, I'm not finished," I said. The way she used to say to me when she was 8 years old and telling me a story and I interrupted with a question. She laughed at that, recognizing it. "I want you to come this Saturday. Bring David if you want, I'd like to meet him. We can walk and talk and I'll introduce you to the woman who sells the best jam in Tennessee. After that, we'll see what happens. No promises about what comes next, because that's not how real things work." "That sounds like a lot more than I deserve," she said quietly. "It probably is," I agreed. "Good thing I'm not giving you what you deserve. I'm giving you what I hope you're becoming." She was quiet for a moment. "I'll be there," she said. 8 o'clock? 8:30. I'm 64 years old. I don't rush anymore. I'm 64 years old. I'm 64 years old. She laughed again, and this time, there was nothing brittle in it. It sounded like her, the real her. The one who used to help me carry equipment upstairs on Saturday mornings when she was 12, and I needed an extra set of hands, and she came without complaining. At least, not too much. "Okay," she said. 8:30. "Okay." I paused. "Claire." "Yeah?" "That man you described, Gerald, from the manufacturing facility. I don't know if you remember him. I wrote about him." "I remember. He was at our company's closing celebration last year. His daughter is a pediatric nurse in Murfreesboro. He's retired now, lives 2 towns over. I looked out at the garden. I called him when I sold the company, because he was one of the first people who treated me like I was worth knowing when I had nothing but a buffer machine and a lot of determination. That's the kind of thing that deserves to be recognized." She didn't say anything for a long moment. "I understand," she finally said. And I believed her. "Saturday," I said, and hung up. I walked out to the back porch and stood in the early evening light that was just starting to soften the edges of everything. Somewhere out there, my daughter was in a studio apartment in my neighborhood, probably already figuring out what time she needed to wake up to be where I was by 8:30. Probably looking at her reflection and seeing something different than she used to see. Probably, if I knew her the way I believed I still did, writing something down. The money had been a good outcome. I'd have been lying if I said otherwise. But I hadn't spent 31 years building something just to arrive at a bank balance. I'd been building proof that losing everything isn't the end of a story unless you decide it is. Proof that a man who starts over at 53 with $43 and a work truck and a fierce, quiet refusal to quit has as much right to take up space in this world as anyone who inherited their address and their connections and their belief in their own importance. I'd tried to give Claire the same proof. Not the money. The proof. What she chose to do with it was still hers to decide. But for the first time in a long time, I was watching with something that felt like hope instead of grief. The peony was already setting buds for spring. I went inside and started thinking about what jam to buy her on Saturday.